The Xbox Series S, X, and PlayStation 5 are almost upon us. But before you pre-order a system, it's worth thinking about storage and how you're going to manage your game library. Because this generation is going to be a little different from the last, and there's a few ways that you can tackle storing and accessing your next-gen titles. If you haven't heard already, all the new consoles are going to be shipping with an internal SSD. Solid-state drives should mean shorter load times and, eventually, new gameplay experiences like the super cool world hopping seen in Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. There's just one major downside to SSDs though: they're more expensive than hard disk drives. So, unsurprisingly, neither Microsoft nor Sony are pushing the envelope on capacity. The Xbox Series S has a 512GB SSD, whilst the PS5 offers 825GB and the Xbox Series X has 1TB. For comparison, both the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X had slower hard disk drives, but they were also 1TB. So you're getting more speed, which is great, but the same or less capacity, unless you're moving over from a system that only had a 500GB hard drive. And that could be a problem. Games have historically grown larger with each console generation. People want more space, not less. Microsoft and Sony are both fully aware of this trend, of course, but to be successful, they have to make consoles that aren't prohibitively expensive. That means sitting down and making calculated compromises that won't deter people from buying one. It's a balancing act, essentially, with more power and new features on one side and the cost of parts and manufacturing on the other. We've said before that the Xbox Series S is an incredible deal, and it really is. For $299, you're getting a box that will run games at 1440p and support 4K via upscaling. It will also offer DirectX ray tracing and support gameplay experiences up to 120 frames per second. But you should think long and hard about that 512GB SSD. Right now, the digital version of Modern Warfare is about 185GB on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. The highly anticipated Cyberpunk 2077 is expected to be an 80GB download. That's already more than 250GB. There are smaller games, of course, such as Cuphead and Fall Guys, and many developers, including Infinity Ward, are working hard to reduce the size of their games. But you have to ask, how many titles will the Series S actually be able to hold? It's a complicated question. Microsoft has said that game files should be slightly smaller on the Series S compared to the Series X, because it doesn't need to download the same 4K assets from the Xbox Store. The internal SSD could also be more efficient. Mark Cerny held a technical presentation for the PS5 earlier this year, where he broke down many of the system's benefits. He explained that usually there are many common game elements, such as a mailbox or a car, that are repeated many times on a hard disk drive so they can be quickly retrieved and loaded into the player's session. The faster SSD shouldn't require these sorts of duplications. That, combined with improvements in compression and decompression, mean that it's possible for the same game to take up less space on a next-generation system. But that's a big assumption. Developers could also use that extra space to pack in more detail and features into their games, particularly if they're being built exclusively for next-gen systems, like Gran Turismo 7. That would negate the efficiencies of the SSD and result in file sizes that are similar to what we have now. If file sizes stay the same, then the Series S could hold, 8 or 9 AAA games maybe? Somewhere in that region anyway. And the PS5 with its 825GB SSD would theoretically hold a few more than that. Now, that might be enough for you, but if it's not, then it's time to consider your options. The first is to buy a Series X. It costs a lot more than the Series S, but it will also take a lot longer to fill up. The second is to think about expandable storage. Now, this is different from previous generations. Microsoft has teamed up with Seagate on a 1TB expansion card that supports Velocity architecture, a combination of features that ensure developers can get the most out of the Series S and X. For now, this is the only SSD that truly supports next-gen games on the Xbox. You can use a cheaper drive both to store and play titles from previous generations, as well as store S and X software. But to play the latest releases with those S and X optimized patches or versions or whatever you want to call them, they will need to be moved either onto the console's internal SSD or one of those Seagate expansion cards. We don't know the price of an expansion card, but leaks have suggested it will cost $220. If that's true, the Series S will actually cost $519, if you want at least a terabyte of instantly accessible next-gen games. In which case, you might as well get the Series X because it costs $20 less and you also get a 4K UHD Blu-ray drive and the ability to play games in true 4K resolution. The PS5 will handle things differently. Sony has confirmed that both versions of its next-gen system, that's the one with a disk drive and the one without, will have an expansion bay for M2 NVMe SSDs. There'll be some kind of PlayStation-approved list, but the company has yet to announce any drives that have made the cut. Like the Xbox Series S and X, you will be able to use external drives, but it's mainly for storing and playing older titles. To actually boot and play PS5 games, they will need to be either on the internal storage or one of these Sony-certified SSDs that you've installed inside the system. So you might want to go with a second SSD for your next PlayStation or Xbox console. Or maybe you don't care about shuffling games all the time between external and internal drives. Both approaches are completely valid and will likely depend on your budget and how many games you want to have immediate access to. Now, there is another way. Just delete and re-download games as you need them from the PlayStation and Xbox stores. It's a fine strategy provided you have a speedy internet connection and no monthly data caps. But many families are still grappling with poor or crazy expensive broadband. If you fall into this camp, you're going to want to keep your favourite games on either an SSD or a cheaper hard disk drive as much as humanly possible. The situation is different this generation, but also kind of familiar. I was one of those people that could only afford an Xbox 360 core at launch. I bought a 256 megabyte memory card and soon realised that what I actually needed was one of the console's detachable hard drives. In hindsight, I should have just waited and bought the version of the console that came with a 20GB hard drive in the box. All I'm saying is, think about storage before making the jump to new hardware. If someone tells you that it only costs $299 to go next gen, they're technically telling the truth, but it's also a bit of a lie if you know in your heart of hearts that you need something more than a 512GB SSD. So think about what next gen means to you and what you can put up with storage-wise before making that pre-order. It might mean that you wait a little bit before making that transition. Because let's be honest, most of the biggest launch titles, such as Spider-Man's Miles Morales and Yakuza Like a Dragon, are going to be playable on older hardware anyway. So there's no rush if the timing isn't right for you. The important thing is that you don't buy something that you'll regret in 1 or 2 years. And that's it for this video. Let us know in the comments below how you will be handling next-gen storage. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. We also have plenty more video game coverage over on Engadget.com.